Blood moon hung like a wound in the black velvet sky, its light staining the stone of the great hall in shades of rust and omen. Smoke from the ceremonial braziers coiled in the air, thick with the scent of burning silver ash and the cloying sweetness of moon-petal incense. It clung to the back of my throat, a familiar suffocating perfume I had breathed at every ritual of my life. Around me, the court of Dravenwood held its breath, a silent, glittering beast of silks and steel, their eyes fixed on me. They saw a princess, a porcelain doll draped in white fur, her silver hair braided with pearls. They saw the silent daughter, the Alpha King's beautiful, broken heir. They did not see the cage of bone and flesh I lived in, the scream that had been building behind my teeth for 20 years. Tonight, the scream felt different. It felt alive. My father, King Miglor Dreven, stood beside me, his presence a mountain of power and expectation. His hand rested on my shoulder, a weight that was meant to be comforting but felt like an anchor. I could feel the desperate hope thrumming through him, a vibration that traveled down his arm and into my very marrow. Speak, Arinya. Let this be the night the goddess unseals your lips. Let my line not end in silence. His thoughts were not his own. They were the collective prayer of a kingdom that saw my muteness as a curse upon us all. The high priestess, her face a mask of serene piety, raised a silver chalice, its contents gleaming darkly in the crimson light. The air grew heavy, pregnant with a magic that was older than the stones around us. Something inevitable was coming, a wave about to break over my head, and I knew with chilling certainty that when it receded, I would either be saved or utterly drowned. The priestess began her chant, her voice a low, resonant hum that vibrated in my chest. The words were ancient, a plea to the Moon Mother to bless the union of a chosen daughter, to reveal the name of her fated mate. For every other she-wolf of age, this was a night of joyous revelation. For me, it was the pinnacle of my public humiliation, an annual spectacle of my failure. Year after year, my father brought me here, his faith a stubborn, painful thing. And year after year, I had offered the moon nothing but the silent echo of my own emptiness. But tonight, the emptiness was gone. In its place was a strange, terrifying hum, a current of energy that pulled at something deep inside me, a place I thought was barren. It started in my gut, a low thrum that spread through my veins like wildfire. My dormant wolf, the spirit that had never stirred, never howled, never answered my desperate pleas, was waking up. It was not a gentle awakening. It was a violent, clawing thing, tearing through the scar tissue of my silence. My hands trembled, hidden in the folds of my white gown. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the priestess's solemn chant. A tether, thin as a spider's silk, yet strong as iron chain, materialized in my soul. It stretched out from me, pulling taut, humming with a frequency that made my teeth ache. It shot out beyond the great hall, beyond the castle walls, across the shadowed expanse of the Whisperwood, over the jagged peaks of the Dragon's Tooth Mountains that marked the border of our lands. It was pulling me towards something, towards someone. The priestess approached, her eyes holding mine. They were dark, knowing, and held a flicker of something I had never seen before. Fear. She dipped a finger into the chalice, which held the blood of the alpha wolf sacrificed at moonrise. The scent hit me, copper and musk, life and death. It was primal, and my awakening wolf surged, hungry for it. "Daughter of Dreven," the priestess intoned, her voice ringing with authority. "The moon is full, the blood is given. Your spirit is called. Speak the name your soul has claimed." She touched her blood-slick finger to the center of my forehead. The moment the blood touched my skin, the world fractured. The tether in my soul snapped tight, and a vision flooded my mind. So powerful it stole the air from my lungs. It was not a memory, but a living, breathing reality. I saw eyes the color of a winter sky, pale and piercing, flecked with silver like shattered ice. A jagged scar traced a hard jawline, a pale line against weathered skin. I smelled the scent of frostbitten pine needles and the cold, clean air of a mountain peak. I felt the raw, untamed power of a wolf born of blizzards and shadows, a predator whose spirit was as harsh and unyielding as the northern lands he called home. Power, unlike any I had ever felt from my father or his warriors, crashed over me. It was not the controlled regal power of an alpha king. This was something wilder, darker. It was the power of a conqueror. The name rose in my throat, not as a thought I formed, but as a physical thing. It was a stone, a fire, a living creature, clawing its way up from the depths of my being. It burned my tongue and filled my mouth, pushing against my sealed lips with an irresistible force. My father's grip on my shoulder tightened, his knuckles white. The entire court leaned forward as one. The silence in the hall was absolute, a perfect crystalline thing waiting to be shattered. My lips, which had never formed a single word, parted. The muscles felt stiff, alien, a sound scraped from my throat, raw and cracked with 2 decades of disuse. It was barely a whisper, yet it echoed in the cavernous hall like a thunderclap. Caliph! The name fell from my lips and hung in the air, shimmering and terrible. It was the sound of a key turning in a lock I never knew existed. For a single breathless moment, the world held still. The fire crackled. The blood moon watched. Then the world broke. A collective gasp ripped through the court, a sharp, sibilant sound of 100 people sucking in air at once. Lady Anya, whose son had been my father's preferred match for me, swayed on her feet, her hand flying to her mouth. Lord Vorlog, the grizzled old war master, took a half-step back, his hand instinctively going to the hilt of his sword. The high priestess recoiled as if I had spat venom at her, her face a mask of horror. The name I had spoken was not that of a Draven ally. It was not the name of any noble son from the southern Pax. It was the name of Caliph Varro, heir to the Varro clan, the shadow wolf of the north, the son of the Alpha who had sworn a blood oath to see my father's kingdom burn to ash. My father went rigid beside me. The warmth of his hand vanished, replaced by a biting cold. I risked a glance at his face. All the desperate hope had been scoured away, leaving behind a terrifying emptiness that was quickly filling with a dark, churning rage. The love he had always shown his broken daughter was gone. In its place was the cold fury of a king who has just heard the sound of treason from the one person he thought he could trust. "What did you say?" His voice was dangerously low, a growl that promised violence. The bond, newly awakened, pulsed inside me. It was a living thing, a warm and insistent presence that paid no mind to the chaos erupting around me. It cared only for the name, for the man it belonged to. My wolf, finally free, wanted to howl his name to the blood moon. I met my father's furious gaze, my own eyes wide with a mixture of terror and a strange, defiant power. The word had been a key. It had unlocked my voice. And so I spoke again, the sound clearer this time, stronger. "Caliph Varro." A woman screamed. A chair clattered as a nobleman shot to his feet. The royal guard snapped to attention, their hands on their weapons, their eyes darting between me and the king. My father's face was a storm cloud of betrayal. He looked at me, but he didn't see his daughter. He saw a viper he had nurtured in his own home. He saw the ultimate disgrace. His silent princess had found her voice only to speak the name of his mortal enemy. "Seize her," he snarled, his voice cracking like a whip through the hall. He shoved me away from him, and I stumbled on the dais, my white furs pooling around my feet like a shroud. "Take her to the North Tower. She is not to speak to anyone. She is not to see anyone. The curse has driven her mad." 2 guards, their faces grim and unreadable, moved toward me. Their scent was of steel and leather and fear. I looked past them, at the faces in the court. I saw no pity. I saw only shock, accusation, and a chilling, predatory curiosity. I had gone from being a broken treasure to a dangerous liability in the space of a single word. As their hands closed around my arms, their grips bruising, the tether inside me pulsed again. A frantic, desperate beat. It was a call, a promise, a warning. Across the mountains in the heart of the enemy's land, a silver-eyed wolf had just felt the snap of a bond locking into place. He would not know my name or my face, but he would feel the pull. He would feel me. My father turned his back on me, a gesture of absolute dismissal. He raised his voice to the stunned court, a king scrambling to reclaim his power. The ceremony is over. The princess is unwell. This madness will be dealt with. They dragged me from the hall, my feet scraping against the cold stone. The last thing I saw was the blood moon, framed in the high-arched doorway. It watched me, impassive and ancient. It had given me a voice. It had given me a mate, and in doing so, it had just signed my death warrant. The scream that had lived inside me for 20 years was finally free, but it was trapped again, this time not by silence, but by a name that had the power to burn my entire world to the ground. The iron door of the North Tower cell boomed shut behind me, the sound a definitive, metallic full stop to the life I had known. The heavy bolt slid into place with a grating shriek of metal on metal, a sound that vibrated through the stone floor and up into my bones. Then silence. It was a different kind of silence from the one I had carried within me. This silence was external, a thick, suffocating blanket woven from stone, fear, and altitude. I was left alone in the cold, still air, the echoes of my father's fury still ringing in my ears. I stood trembling in the center of the circular room, my ceremonial white furs a ghostly stain against the oppressive gray of the stone. This was no dungeon. My father's cruelty had a gilded edge. A narrow bed with a frame of dark, carved wood was pushed against one wall, a thick woolen blanket folded neatly upon it, a heavy tapestry depicting a long-dead Draven king slaying a monstrous shadow beast covered the opposite wall, its threads faded, its colors muted by dust and time. It did little to soften the chill. High above, a single arched window, crisscrossed with thick iron bars, allowed a sliver of the blood moon's crimson light to spill onto the floor, a single accusing eye watching me from the heavens. My legs gave out, and I sank to the floor, my gown puddling around me. The cold of the stone seeped through the fine fabric, a biting reality. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to contain the tremors that racked my body. Mad. My father had called me mad. He who had held my hand and whispered stories to me in my silent youth, who had defended me against the pitying glances of the court, had looked at me with the eyes of a stranger and condemned me. The love I had believed was unconditional had shattered at the sound of a single word. A dry, ragged sob tried to fight its way out of my throat, but it died as a choked gasp. 20 years of silence had taught my body how to swallow sound, how to bury every emotion so deep it couldn't find a voice. But something else was stirring now, something that refused to be buried. Caliph. The name wasn't my thought. It bloomed in my mind like a frost flower, perfect and sharp. It came with a feeling, a low, resonant hum that vibrated from the base of my skull down my spine. It was my wolf. She was a ghost in my own skin, a phantom presence I had only ever dreamed of. For years, I had felt her as a hollow ache, a missing piece of my soul. Now she was here, a low, rumbling growl in the back of my mind, a restless pacing in the cage of my ribs. She was not afraid. She was furious. She raged against the stone walls, against the locked door, against the distance that separated us from the one who bore that name. Her anger was a clean, hot fire, so different from my own cold, trembling fear. She cared nothing for kings or courts or blood feuds. Her world had suddenly simplified into a single, primal imperative: mate, north, go. I pressed my forehead against the cold, unyielding stone of the wall, trying to silence the insistent pulse in my head. This is madness, I thought, echoing my father. A bond with the son of his greatest enemy? It was a cruel joke played by the goddess. The Varros were our sworn enemies, a pact of vengeance sealed in blood 3 generations ago, when their alpha had killed my great-grandfather in a territorial dispute. They were reavers, savages from the frozen north who worshipped the old wild gods and answered to no laws but their own. Whispers in the court called Caliph Vero the Winter Fiend, a killer forged in blizzards, with a heart as cold as the ice in his veins. And my soul, my silent, broken soul, had reached across a continent to claim him. Hours passed. The slice of moonlight crept across the floor, its colors slowly fading from blood red to the pale, sterile silver of the waning dawn. I did not sleep. I sat huddled on the floor, caught in the terrifying tug-of-war between my human fear and the feral certainty of my wolf. She showed me flashes of him, not memories, but echoes pulled through the bond. The shocking cold of a northern wind on bare skin, the scent of pine and snow, the weight of a heavy fur cloak, the glint of silver eyes narrowed against a storm. These fragments were intoxicating and terrifying, whispers of a man who was my destiny and my doom. The sound of the bolt being drawn back startled me so violently I flinched, scrambling back until my shoulders hit the wall. My heart hammered against my ribs. Was it my father? Had he come to finish what he started, to silence me for good this time? The door swung inward, and a large figure filled the frame, blocking the torchlight from the hall. It wasn't the king, it was Lord Vorlog, the War Master, his face a grim landscape of scars and worry. His scent filled the small room, old leather, steel, and the faint sour smell of stale wine. He was my father's most loyal man, his right hand in all matters of war. He dismissed the guards with a curt nod and stepped inside, letting the door swing closed, but not latched. He looked at me, huddled on the floor like a frightened animal, and his expression softened for a fraction of a second. He had known me since I was a child, had even carved me a small wooden wolf when I was 5. A silent toy for a silent girl. "Princess Arinyakont," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You have caused quite a storm." I stared at him, my lips pressed together. My wolf bristled at his tone, at the intrusion. A low growl started in my chest, and to my shock, a faint guttural sound escaped my lips. Vorlog's eyes widened. He took a slow, deliberate step back. He was used to the silent daughter, the docile princess. He was not prepared for this. "So the voice is real," he murmured, more to himself than to me. He cleared his throat, his official mask sliding back into place. "The king is displeased. The council is in an uproar. They are calling for your seclusion. Some are even whispering the old words. Words like abomination and cull." The threat hung in the air between us, cold and sharp. My human side recoiled in terror, but my wolf met the threat with a snarl of her own, a purely mental aggression that I felt as a wave of heat. Vorlog sighed, running a hand over his weary face. "Child, you must listen to me. You must tell them you were wrong, that the moon's magic overwhelmed you, that you spoke the first name that came to your mind in a fit of delusion. Say anything. Recant this claim." Recant? How could I recant something that was now a part of my very being? The bond was a living thread woven into my soul. To deny it would be to deny my own breath. I shook my head, a small, defiant gesture. His jaw tightened. "You don't understand the danger you are in. The danger you have put this kingdom in. To claim the son of Maelor's most hated enemy as your mate. It is an act of war. The Varos will see it as a trick. Our own people will see it as the highest treason. There is no path forward from this but bloodshed." He knelt, his old knees cracking, so his eyes were level with mine. "Arinya, I have watched you grow. I have seen your father's heart break for you 1,000 times over your silence. Do not let your first words be the ones that destroy him." His plea was genuine, and it cut me deeper than any threat. I looked into his tired eyes and saw the loyal soldier, the man who would die for his king, and I saw that he, like my father, could never understand. They saw politics, alliances, and ancient hatreds. They could not feel the truth that hummed in my blood. I opened my mouth, my throat dry. I had to make him understand. The word came out as a raw whisper, scraping my vocal cords. "It's true." Vorlog recoiled as if I had struck him. He stared at me for a long moment, the last vestiges of hope dying in his eyes. He rose slowly to his feet, his posture once again that of the rigid war master. "Then the goddess have mercy on us all," he said, his voice flat and empty. He turned and walked to the door, his heavy boots echoing my doom. He paused with his hand on the iron ring. "The high priestess has requested to see you. The king has granted it. Perhaps she can reason with the madness the moon has planted in you." He left, and the bolt slammed home again, sealing me back into my solitude. But his words left a new chill in their wake. The high priestess, the woman who had recoiled in horror when I spoke the name, she had not looked shocked. She had looked terrified, as if she recognized something she had seen before. An hour later, the bolt slid back again, but this time it was quieter, more furtive. The door opened not to the brutish presence of the guards, but to the slender robed figure of the high priestess. She slipped inside, silent as a shadow, and pushed the door closed, leaving it unbolted. Her scent was of cold stone and the moon petal incense that always clung to her, but underneath it, I smelled something else. I smelled fear. She stood before me, her face unreadable in the dim light. She held a small leather-bound book clutched in her hands, her knuckles white. "They think you are mad, child," she whispered, her voice a dry rustle of leaves. "They think this is a curse." I simply watched her, my inner wolf wary and still. The priestess took a step closer, her dark eyes searching my face. "But I have read the old prophecies, the ones buried so deep in the archives the king has forgotten they exist. They speak of a time when the blood feud has all but consumed the two oldest lines. They speak of a silent daughter, born to the line of the stag, who will be given a voice by the blood moon to speak the name of the wolf." My breath caught in my throat. She wasn't here to condemn me. "It is not a curse, Princess Arinya," she continued, her voice trembling with a terrible reverence. "It is a binding, a fated claim made under a blood moon, has not occurred in 500 years. It is a magic more powerful than any king's decree, more absolute than any treaty. It cannot be denied or undone." She opened the ancient book, her fingers tracing brittle script. "When you spoke his name, you did more than claim a mate. You invoked the Alpha's choice, an ancient law that supersedes all others. He is now bound to you as you are to him, and he will have to choose." "Choose?" The word was a faint breath. "He will have two paths," she said, her eyes boring into mine, filled with a chilling gravity. "He must either forsake his pack, his name, and his inheritance to accept your claim, or he must come here and formally reject you, severing the bond by spilling the blood of the one who made it." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "He must choose to accept you, or he must choose to kill you. Accept me or kill me." The high priestess's words echoed in the stone silence of my cell long after she had gone, slipping away as furtively as she had arrived. They were not a comfort. They were the two grinding stones between which my life was about to be crushed into dust. One path led to the obliteration of a man's entire world. The other led to my grave. There was no third option, no gentle path through the thorns. The moon had given me a voice only to articulate my own death sentence. Days bled into one another, measured only by the changing slant of light through the barred window. My father did not come. No one came, save for a silent servant who left trays of untouched food by the door. The isolation was absolute, a deliberate attempt to erase me, to let the madness fester and die in the cold, thin air of the North Tower. But I was not alone. My wolf, a constant, restless presence, paced the confines of my mind. She was a creature of instinct, unburdened by the complexities of courtly hate. She did not understand the concept of a blood feud. She only understood the bond, the incessant humming pull toward the north. It was a dull ache when I was calm, a sharp, stabbing pain when my fear and despair crested. The visions continued, growing stronger, more vivid. They were no longer just fleeting sensations. They came upon me in waking dreams, so real I would gasp and find myself back on the cold stone floor, my heart racing. I saw him training in a snowy courtyard, the movements of his body a fluid, lethal dance as he wielded a heavy northern blade. I saw him standing on a frost-rimed parapet, the wind whipping through his dark hair as he stared south, his silver eyes narrowed as if searching for something he couldn't see. One night, the vision was so powerful, I felt I was inside his skin. I felt the bite of the wind, the coarse wool of his tunic, and a deep, gnawing restlessness in his own soul, a phantom pull he could not identify. He was feeling the bond, too. He was being hunted by my ghost. On the 5th day, the scent of the air changed. The familiar smell of damp stone, and my own fear was overwritten by something new. It was the scent of wet earth, of decaying leaves, of the thick, cloying mist that sometimes rolled down from the Dragon's Tooth Mountains and swallowed the castle whole. A heavy, unnatural fog had descended. It blanketed my window, turning the world outside into a pearlescent, sightless void. My wolf, who had been a low, sullen rumble for days, suddenly stirred. She rose to her paws in my mind, her head cocked, her nostrils flaring. She smelled something in the mist, something besides the fog. She smelled pine, snow, she smelled wolf. He is here. The thought was not mine, but hers, a declaration of absolute certainty that made the hair on my arms stand on end. Terror and a wild, traitorous thrill warred within me. Here? How could that be? No werewolf had set foot in Dravenwood for a century without it meaning open war. To come now to the very heart of my father's power, it was either supreme arrogance or a suicide mission. The lock on my door, silent for 5 days, scraped open. My breath hitched. I scrambled to my feet, pressing myself back against the tapestry, my eyes wide and fixed on the door. It wasn't a guard. It was Vorlag again, but his face was different. It was pale, strained, his eyes holding a new kind of dread. He was not wearing his armor, only a simple leather tunic. "Princess," he said, his voice tight, "come with me. The king commands it." He did not wait for my reply, but turned, expecting me to follow. My legs felt like lead, but my wolf urged me forward, curious and unafraid. I followed him out of the tower and into the winding stone corridors of the castle. The fog had seeped inside, clinging to the floors in ethereal wisps, muffling the sounds of our footsteps. The guards we passed were tense, their hands gripping their spears, their eyes darting nervously into the coiling mists. The entire castle was holding its breath. Vorlag led me not to the throne room, but down a narrow, spiraling staircase I had never seen before. It descended into the very bowels of the castle, the air growing colder, damper. It ended at a small, unassuming postern gate, a heavy iron-studded door used by servants. It was open. Beyond it, the world was gone, replaced by a churning wall of white fog. The mists were so thick I could not see more than a few feet ahead. "Where are we going?" My voice was a croak. "The Ghostwood," Vorlag answered without looking at me. "There is an old clearing there, on neutral ground according to the ancient pacts, a place for parley." He finally turned, his gaze heavy with grim resignation. "He sent a single rider under a white flag. An impossible request. He wishes to speak with the one who named him." My heart stopped, then started again with a painful, violent lurch. Caliph. He had come. He had not sent an army. He had not sent a rejection scribed on parchment. He had come himself. The Alpha's choice. He had come to make it. Vorlag gestured to a heavy cloak draped over a nearby crate. "Put this on, and princess, whatever happens out there, do not show fear. You are the daughter of the Alpha King. You will remember that." His words were meant to be steel in my spine, but they only felt like another crushing weight. I was not the daughter of the Alpha King. I was his disgrace, his prisoner, being led out to meet her potential executioner. I wrapped the heavy wool cloak around my shoulders, pulling the hood up to shadow my face. Vorlag led me out into the fog. It was like stepping into another world. The mist was cold and wet, clinging to my skin and clothes. It deadened all sound, creating an eerie, pressing silence broken only by the drip of condensation from unseen branches. The familiar smells of the castle were gone, replaced by the raw, primal scent of the ancient forest. We walked for what felt like an eternity. I could feel the presence of my father's guards moving like ghosts in the mist around us, unseen but felt, their anxiety a palpable tension in the air. Finally, Vorlog stopped. We had reached a small clearing. In the center, a single ancient stone monolith, covered in moss and faded runes, rose from the damp earth. The Ghostwood, a place where the veil between worlds was said to be thin, a place of old magic and older promises. A figure was already there, standing by the stone. At first, he was just a silhouette in the shifting fog, tall and broad-shouldered. But as the mist swirled, details emerged, and the air was stolen from my lungs. It was him. The visions had not done him justice. He was taller than I'd imagined, built with the hard, lean muscle of a predator. He wore dark, practical leathers, no sigils or finery, but they fit him in a way that spoke more of power than any crown. His dark hair was damp with the mist, and the jagged scar on his jaw was a stark, pale line against his skin. But it was his eyes that held me captive. They were exactly as I had seen them, the color of a winter sky, flecked with silver, and they were fixed on me. He was alone. There were no guards, no Awakens. He had walked into the heart of his enemy's territory by himself. The sheer breathtaking audacity of it was terrifying. His scent rolled off him in waves, carried on the damp air, frost-bitten pine and cold mountain stone. It was the scent from my dreams, the scent my wolf recognized as home. She surged forward in my mind, a desperate, yearning cry. Mate, Vorlog stepped in front of me, a protective, if futile gesture. Calith Vero, he growled, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword. You have made a bold and foolish move coming here. Calith's gaze did not leave my face. It was an intense, piercing stare, stripping away my cloak, my skin, my very bones. He was looking for something, testing the tether that bound us. I felt the connection between us hum, a vibrant, living chord in the misty air. I did not come to speak with the king's dog, Calith said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that vibrated through the clearing. It held the chill of the north, yet there was a fire banked deep within it. I came to speak with her. He took a step forward. Instantly, the clearing was filled with the hiss of drawn steel as a dozen of my father's guards materialized from the mist, their swords leveled at Calith's chest. He didn't even flinch. His gaze remained locked on me. He didn't see the swords, or the guards, or the war master. He saw only me. Let her speak, he commanded, and the authority in his voice was absolute. It was the voice of a true alpha, a command that resonated in the very marrow of every wolf present, friend or foe. The guards wavered. Vorlog gritted his teeth. I knew this was the moment. The choice was his, but the first move had to be mine. I lowered my hood, letting the damp, heavy fabric fall back. I let him see my face, my pale skin, my silver hair, the terror and the defiance warring in my eyes. I took a shaky step forward, moving past Vorlog's restraining arm. I stopped a few feet from Calith, the points of my father's guard swords now hovering mere inches from my own back. We stood in a deadly circle of steel, the two of us at its epicenter. I met his gaze. The force of his presence was overwhelming. He was everything the stories said, a force of nature, a creature of winter and shadow. But there was something else in his eyes, something beyond the cold assessment of a warrior. There was a flicker of confusion, of disbelief, of a soul recognizing its other half in the face of its sworn enemy. I had to speak. I had to confirm the claim my soul had made. My throat was tight with fear, my lips numb. I drew a breath, the misty air burning my lungs. The single word that had shattered my world felt even heavier now, spoken to the man it belonged to. Calith, I whispered, the sound barely disturbing the air. But he heard it. I saw the recognition flash in his silver eyes. I saw the muscles in his jaw clench. The bond between us flared, a searing line of heat. He took another step, closing the distance between us until I had to crane my neck to look up at him. I could feel the heat radiating from his body. I could smell the leather of his tunic, the scent of the wild, clean north that clung to him. He was so close. The guards tensed, their knuckles white on their sword hilts. He slowly raised a hand. It was a large hand, calloused and scarred. I flinched, expecting a blow, a rejection made manifest, but his touch, when it came, was shockingly gentle. He didn't touch my skin. His fingertips hovered an inch from my cheek, yet I could feel the heat, the energy, the raw power thrumming just beneath his skin. "You," he murmured, his voice a rough, wondering sound. "It was you." And then his eyes hardened. The brief moment of connection vanished, replaced by the cold mask of the Vero air. He had felt the bond, acknowledged it, and was now pushing it away. "The daughter of Maelor Draven," he said, his voice laced with a bitter contempt that felt like a physical blow. He dropped his hand. "The moon plays cruel games." He looked past me then, his gaze sweeping over the nervous guards, over Vorlog's grim face. "I have seen what I came to see. I have heard the claim from her own lips." His eyes met mine one last time, and they were as cold and unforgiving as a winter storm. "The Alpha's choice will be made," he declared, his voice ringing with finality. "Tell your king to expect my answer at sunrise." Sunrise. The word was a death knell. As Caliph Vero turned and vanished back into the mists, disappearing as silently and completely as a phantom, the word he left behind hung in the clearing, colder than the fog. My father's guards closed ranks around me, their relief a sour scent on the air, but I felt no safety in their presence. I felt only the chilling finality of Calith's promise. His answer would come with the dawn, accept or kill. Vorlog hustled me back through the ghostwood, his hand a firm, unyielding grip on my arm. He didn't speak, but the tension radiating from him was a language all its own. He was a soldier escorting a bomb that could detonate at any moment. When we reached the postern gate, my father was waiting for us. King Maelor Draven stood just inside the castle walls, his silhouette a rigid slash of fury against the torchlight. The mist coiled around his boots as if afraid to touch him. His face, when I saw it, was not the face of the father who had cradled me in my youth. It was the face of the Alpha King whose kingdom had been threatened, whose pride had been savaged. His eyes were chips of granite, hard and merciless. "You spoke to him," he stated. It was not a question. I could only nod, my throat tight. The cold of the fog seemed to have settled deep in my bones, a permanent chill I would never be free of. "What did he say?" he demanded, his voice a low growl that promised retribution. "He said," I faltered, my own voice a reedy whisper, "he will give his answer at sunrise." My father's lip curled in a sneer. "His answer. He thinks he has a choice in this matter. He walks into my lands, speaks to my daughter, and thinks he can dictate terms." He took a step toward me, his rage a palpable heat. "You have brought this upon us, Arinya, this humiliation, this Vero filth daring to stand in my woods, breathing my air. Whatever his answer is, it will be met with steel." He turned to Vorlog, his fury shifting its target. "Double the sentries on the eastern wall. Send scouts to the Vero border. I want to know if he brought an army with him, hiding in the shadows." "My king," Vorlog said, his voice steady despite the king's temper. "He came alone. I am certain of it. It was not an act of war. It was an act of profound arrogance," my father roared, his voice echoing in the stone passageway. "He comes to test our resolve, to see the fracture you have created in my house." He stabbed a finger in my direction. "Take her back to the tower. She is to see no one. If Caliph Varo chooses rejection, he will have his blood. And if by some mad chance he chooses acceptance, he will find that the object of his claim is already gone." The threat was unmistakable. My life was a bargaining chip, a piece in his game of power, and he was ready to sweep it from the board to deny his enemy a victory. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the dull ache of the bond. My father, in his rage and shame, would see me dead before he would see me mated to a Vero. I was dragged back to my gilded cage, the bolt of the door sounding more final than ever before. This time, there was no pretense of comfort. The tray of food left by the door was gone. The heavy tapestry had been torn from the wall, leaving behind a darker, colder patch of stone and the ghosts of rusted nails. The king was stripping away the last vestiges of my royal identity. I was no longer his daughter. I was his shame, his prisoner, his secret to be disposed of. The hours between then and sunrise were the longest of my life. The fog outside the window thinned as the night deepened, revealing a sky strewn with cold, indifferent stars. There were no more visions of Caliph, no more flashes of connection. The bond was still there, a taut line in my soul, but it was ominously quiet, as if holding its breath. My wolf paced, a frantic, caged thing. She could not comprehend the politics, the hatred. She only knew that our mate was near, and we were locked away from him. She felt the threat from my father, the scent of his rage clinging to me like a shroud, and it made her hackles rise. She did not trust him. She did not trust any of them. "Flee," she urged, a frantic whisper in my mind. "Claw the door down, break the bars, go to him, he will keep us safe." But I was not just a wolf. I was Arinya, a girl raised in a stone castle, taught duty and obedience through gestures and kind looks. To flee was to become a traitor not just to my father, but to my entire people. And where would I go? Into the arms of a man who was, at this very moment, deciding whether to claim me or murder me. As the first hint of gray began to soften the edges of the night sky, a sound broke the silence. It was not the changing of the guard or the distant clang of the castle bells. It was a single resonant note from a war horn, blown from the eastern battlements. An answer. My heart leaped into my throat. I rushed to the window, my fingers curling around the cold iron bars. I peered down, my vantage point giving me a sweeping, if distant, view of the castle's main gate and the fields beyond. The fog had completely retreated, leaving the landscape sharp and clear in the pre-dawn light. And there, 100 yards from the castle walls, stood Caliph Vero. He was alone, just as he had been in the woods. He stood motionless, a solitary, dark figure against the lightening sky, his hands empty at his sides. There was no army, no banner, no herald, only him. It was a statement of profound power. He had no need for an army. His answer would be delivered by him and him alone. I saw movement on the battlements below. My father, flanked by Vorlog, and a retinue of his royal guard, strode to the edge of the wall. Even from this distance, I could feel his rigid fury. The great horn blew again, a challenge that echoed across the fields. My father's voice, amplified by the morning stillness, carried up to my tower. "You stand before the gates of Drevenwood, Shadow Wolf. Have you come to beg for your life after your trespass?" Caliph's answer was just as clear, his powerful voice rolling across the distance with ease. "I have come to answer the claim, as is my right by the old law." A tense silence fell. My fingers were white where I gripped the bars. This was it, the moment of my judgment. "And what is your answer?" my father called, his voice dripping with venom. "Do you choose to reject the mad claim of a cursed girl? If so, deliver your blow and be gone from my lands. Or do you dare to think you can claim a daughter of my house?" Caliph stood silent for a long moment. He raised his head, and I felt his eyes find me, even across the vast distance. He was looking right at my window. The bond flared between us, a sudden, sharp jolt, as if he had reached out and touched my very soul. It was a moment of pure connection, a silent question passing between us. Then he looked back at my father on the wall and spoke the words that would change everything. "I do not reject the claim," he called out, his voice ringing with an authority that defied kings. "I accept the bond. Arinya Draven is my mate. A wave of disbelief and fury washed over the battlements. I heard my father's enraged roar, a sound more beast than man. Below, Caliph stood his ground, unmoved. He had made his choice. He had chosen me. He had chosen to forsake his pack, his name, his inheritance, all for a bond with his enemy. A dizzying, impossible hope surged through me. It was so powerful it made me weak at the knees. He had chosen me. But my father's voice cut through the dawn, sharp and cruel. You think it is so simple? You think you can claim what is mine? She is a Draven. Her blood belongs to this land, to this pack. She will never be yours. She is my mate, Caliph stated again. His voice flat, as if explaining a simple truth to a stubborn child. The law is clear, she belongs with me. The only thing you will find here is your death, my father bellowed. Archers! My blood ran cold. On the wall, a line of archers stepped forward, knocking arrows to their bowstrings. They aimed not at Caliph, but at the sky, a volley of warning shots. But as I watched, horrified, I noticed something else. Something was wrong. The scent on the air, it was changing. The clean morning air was suddenly tainted by a strange acrid smell. It was subtle at first, then stronger, the smell of smoke. My eyes darted around the courtyard below my tower. A thin wisp of gray smoke was curling from beneath the door of the great hall, then another from the kitchens, and another from the barracks. A new scent reached me then, carried on the rising breeze. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but my newly awakened senses caught it. It was the scent of other wolves. Not Draven wolves. Strange, wild scents. Vero wolves. My mind reeled. Caliph had not come alone. His army wasn't hiding in the shadows. They were already inside. Panic erupted in the bailey below, shouts of alarm, the clang of steel. A fire had been set as a diversion. While all eyes were on Caliph at the front gate, his warriors had infiltrated the castle from within. This wasn't a parley, it was a Trojan horse. It was an invasion. My gaze snapped back to Caliph. He was no longer looking at my tower. His silver eyes were fixed on my father, and in them I saw not the reluctant honor of a man making a difficult choice, but the cold, calculating focus of a predator whose trap had just been sprung. The hope that had bloomed in my chest withered and died, replaced by a devastating, soul-crushing understanding. This was never about the Alpha's choice. He hadn't come to honor the bond. He had used it. He had used me. He had woven this beautiful, impossible story of a fated claim, knowing it would draw all of my father's attention, leaving the castle vulnerable to a surprise attack. He hadn't chosen to forsake his pack for me. He had chosen to use me to destroy mine. The betrayal was so profound it felt like a physical wound, stealing the air from my lungs. The bond, that beautiful, humming tether in my soul, now felt like a viper's bite, injecting poison directly into my heart. He had felt it, he had acknowledged it, and he had twisted it into a weapon. On the wall, Vorlog shouted something to my father, pointing toward the fires. The archers lowered their bows, their formation breaking in confusion. My father turned, his face a mask of disbelief, as he finally understood the scale of the deception. And in that moment of chaos, a grappling hook shot up from the base of my tower, its iron claws catching on the stone ledge of my window with a loud clang. A thick rope snapped taut. My blood turned to ice. They weren't just attacking the castle. They were coming for me. Caliph hadn't just come to conquer Dravenwood. He had come to claim his prize. The iron claws of the grappling hook were a stark, brutal reality against the stone of my window. Below, the castle had descended into chaos. The ringing of alarm bells mixed with the roar of flames and the clash of steel on steel. My father's guards, caught completely by surprise, were scrambling to fight an enemy that was already inside their walls. And Caliph Varro, the architect of it all, remained standing outside the gates, a calm, unmoving center to the storm he had unleashed. He had accepted my claim only to use it as the key to unlock our doom. The bond in my soul was a screaming, agonized thing. It was a symphony of betrayal and a primal, undeniable pull of triumph from him. He was winning. He was coming for what was his. My wolf, who had yearned for him, was now a cornered, snarling thing, torn between the instinct to flee toward her mate and the savage need to defend her own. A dark shape appeared at the window, ascending the rope with the swift, silent grace of a predator. It was not Caliph. This wolf was leaner, younger, with a wild shock of red hair and eyes that glittered with a fierce, manic light in the dawn. He smelled of smoke and bloodlust, a Vero warrior. He hauled himself over the ledge, landing in a crouch inside my cell, a curved blade already in his hand. He grinned, a flash of white teeth in a soot-stained face. "The silent princess," he mocked, his voice a low drawl. "Not so slant anymore, eh? You've made our alpha a very happy man." I backed away until my shoulders hit the far wall, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My entire body trembled, but a new, unfamiliar sensation was rising to meet the fear. A cold, hard knot of fury. I had been a pawn, a fool, a willing lure in my own destruction. "He sent you to fetch me?" I asked, my voice shaking but edged with ice. "Like a prize sow he's won at market?" The warrior's grin widened. "Something like that. Caliph wants his queen." He took a step toward me, raising his blade slightly. "Now you can come quietly, princess, or I can sling you over my shoulder like a sack of grain. Makes no difference to me." Before I could answer, the heavy oak door to my cell exploded inward. It didn't swing open, it shattered, blown from its iron hinges by a force of pure, animalistic rage. Lord Vorlog stood in the splintered frame, his face a mask of fury, his greatsword in his hands, dripping with dark blood. 2 of my father's guards were behind him, their own weapons drawn. "Get away from her, Varo filth!" Vorlog snarled, his voice a guttural rumble. The red-haired warrior spun around, his grin turning into a feral snarl. He was outnumbered, but he showed no fear. "Come to protect the little traitor, have you, old man? She called us here. She belongs to us now." "She belongs to no one but herself!" Vorlog roared and charged. The cell, my prison for days, became a whirlwind of brutal, lethal violence. Steel rang against steel, the sounds deafening in the enclosed space. The Vero warrior was impossibly fast, his curved blade a blur, but Vorlog was a bulwark of experience and raw strength. He fought like a cornered bear, his great sword cleaving arcs of death in the cramped room. One of the guards went down with a choked gurgle, the Vero's blade buried in his throat. The other guard lunged, only to be disemboweled by a vicious backhand slash. It was just Vorlog and the Vero now. They were locked in a desperate, grunting dance of death. I was pressed against the wall, trapped, the metallic scent of fresh blood thick in my throat. I saw an opening, a moment when the Varo overextended, and Vorlog, with a mighty heave, plunged his sword through the man's chest. The Varo's eyes went wide, a look of shocked disbelief on his face. He choked, blood bubbling on his lips, and then sagged, sliding from the blade to collapse in a heap on the floor. Vorlog stood panting, leaning heavily on his sword, the front of his tunic soaked in blood, some his enemies'. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a weary, desperate urgency. "Princess, we have to go, now. The castle is overrun." He grabbed my arm, pulling me over the bodies of the fallen and out into the corridor. The chaos I had seen from my window was 1,000 times worse up close. Pockets of fierce fighting raged in the hallways. The air was thick with smoke, stinging my eyes and choking my lungs. Loyal Draven guards fought back to back against the invaders, who seemed to be everywhere at once. "Where is my father?" I cried, my voice lost in the din. "On the battlements, trying to rally the men," Vorlog shouted back, dragging me down a staircase. "He gave me one order, get you to the catacombs. There's a secret exit that leads to the river. It's your only chance." His words confirmed my father's threat. He was not saving me. He was spiriting me away, denying Caliph his prize, even if it meant my exile or death. But right now, it was my only hope of survival. We fought our way down through the castle, Vorlog a whirlwind of destruction at my side. He was a force of nature, an old wolf showing his fangs for one last glorious fight. But he was bleeding from a dozen small wounds, and his movements were growing slower, his breaths coming in ragged gasps. As we reached the ground floor, near the entrance to the great hall, a figure stepped out of the swirling smoke, blocking our path. It was Caliph. He stood there, untouched by the battle raging around him, his dark leathers pristine, his silver eyes burning with a cold, possessive fire. He must have entered the castle through a breach his men had created. The fighting around us seemed to quiet, both Vero and Draven warriors pausing to watch the confrontation between the two alphas, one old, one new, with me standing between them. The bond yanked at me, a physical, agonizing pull. My traitorous heart stuttered at the sight of him, even as my mind screamed his betrayal. My wolf was a mess of conflicting instincts, yearning, rage, fear, and a dark, possessive desire that mirrored his own. "Let her go, Vorlog," Caliph said, his voice dangerously calm. Vorlog shoved me behind him, raising his blood-soaked sword. "You will have to kill me first, Varro." "I had hoped to avoid that," Caliph said, and there was a flicker of something that might have been genuine regret in his eyes. "You are a fine warrior. Your alpha is a fool to be fighting on that wall instead of protecting his most valuable asset." He took a step forward, Paul. "But I will not be denied my mate." "She is not your mate," Vorlog roared. "She is your excuse. Your key to open a gate you were too cowardly to storm." "Call it what you will," Caliph replied, drawing his own blade. It was a simple, unadorned sword, but it seemed to drink the light from the air. "The result is the same. Dravenwood falls, and she comes with me." He moved, and he was not just fast. He was impossibly swift, a blur of shadow and steel. Vorlog met his charge with a desperate parry, the clash of their swords sending sparks flying into the smoky air. The War Master was strong, but he was wounded and tired. Caliph was fresh, fueled by victory and purpose. Their duel was short, brutal, and inevitable. Caliph disarmed Vorlog with a flick of his wrist, sending the greatsword clattering across the stone floor. He spun inside the older wolf's guard, his movements precise and economical. He did not kill him. Instead, he slammed the pommel of his sword into the side of Vorlog's head. The old warrior crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Silence fell in our small pocket of the battle. Caliph stood over Vorlog's body, his chest rising and falling slightly. He turned his silver gaze to me. "He fought for you," Caliph said, his voice low. "He has more honor than his king." I stared at him, my fury finally overriding my fear. "And you have none." A muscle feathered in his scarred jaw. "I did what I had to do to end a war that should have ended a century ago. Your father would have continued this pointless blood feud until both our lines were dust. I chose to end it. You were the means." "I was the bait," I spat, my voice dripping with the venom I didn't know I possessed. "You are my mate," he countered, his intensity unwavering. "That part was never a lie. The bond is real, Arinya. You feel it as I do. When I heard your claim, I knew the goddess had finally given me a weapon sharp enough to break this stalemate. I used it. I would do it again." He sheathed his sword and took a step toward me. "Now it is over. Your father's reign is done. Come with me. A new world awaits us in the north. You will be my Alpha Queen. We will rule together." His words were a heady poison, a promise of power and belonging wrapped around a core of utter betrayal. He wasn't apologizing. He was justifying. He saw his actions as necessary, even noble. And the most terrifying part was that the bond, that cursed, beautiful thing inside me, pulsed with a dark sense of rightness. My wolf saw the logic in his actions. The strongest alpha wins. The war ends. The pack survives. But I was not just a wolf. "No, I whispered. His eyes narrowed. "No, I will not be a prize you carry home from a slaughter," I said, my voice gaining strength. "I will not build a life with you on the ashes of my home and the bodies of my people." He took another step, so close now I could see the flecks of silver in his winter sky eyes. "You have no choice. You are mine. The bond decrees it." The bond gave you a weapon, I shot back, my voice rising. But it gave me a voice. And that voice says no. For the first time since I had met him, I saw uncertainty flicker in his eyes. He had planned for every military contingency, but he had not planned for my defiance. He had seen me as a symbol, a key, a mate to be claimed. He had not seen me. From the far end of the hall, a roar of pure, undiluted fury echoed. Caliph! We both turned. My father stood there, his face black with soot, his silver royal armor dented and stained with blood. His crown was gone, and in his hand he held a massive, double-bladed axe. He was no longer a king. He was a berserker, his eyes burning with mad grief and hatred. He had seen the castle fall. He had nothing left to lose. "You will not have her!" He bellowed and charged, his axe raised. Caliph pushed me behind him, drawing his sword again. "Your father is a fool," he bit out. "He chooses death." But I saw my chance. While Caliph's attention was on the charging king, I turned and ran. Not toward the catacombs. They would be found. I ran toward the one place no one would think to look. I ran back toward the flames. I scrambled up a collapsed section of the grand staircase, toward the burning upper levels of the castle. "Arinya!" Caliph's command was a whip crack of sound, but I ignored it. I heard the brutal, sickening crunch of his sword meeting my father's charge, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. I fled into the fire and smoke, my lungs screaming, my eyes streaming. I would not be his prize. I would not be my father's sacrifice. The blood moon had given me a bond and a voice. It had started this. And now I would use the chaos it had created to make my own choice. I chose escape. I chose myself. I would rather burn in the ruins of my own home than be carried away to rule from a throne built on lies. A year had passed. One full turn of the seasons, each one a balm laid over a blistering wound. The world had not ended in the fire that consumed Dravenwood. It had simply changed. I lived now where the Whisperwood gave way to the sea, in a small whitewashed cottage that clung to the cliffs like a stubborn barnacle. The air here was not thick with incense and intrigue, but sharp with the scent of salt and kelp and the clean, cold wind that swept in from the gray water expanse. My hands, once soft and useless, were now calloused from hauling fishing nets and splitting driftwood for my hearth. The silks and furs were gone, replaced by practical wool and worn leather. I had traded a gilded cage for a life of wind and work, and in the trade, I had found a freedom I never knew existed. I was no longer Arinya Draven, the silent princess. Here, I was just Anya, the quiet woman from the woods, who bartered carved seabirds for flour and salt. I spoke now, not often, but when I needed to. My voice was still low, sometimes hesitant, but it was mine. It was a tool, like the knife I used to gut fish, or the axe I used to chop wood. I had learned its weight and its purpose. I no longer feared it. The bond was still there, a low, constant hum beneath the surface of my skin, like a distant melody I could never quite forget. It was no longer the screaming, agonized thing it had been in the fire. It was a quiet ache, a phantom limb that reminded me of a part of myself I had been forced to amputate. In the long, quiet nights, with only the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks below, I sometimes let myself feel its pull. It still tugged north, it still yearned. But I was its master now, not its slave. I had escaped the burning castle through a maze of servants' passages I had discovered in my lonely childhood wanderings. I emerged into the pre-dawn chaos, a ghost in the smoke, and simply walked away. No one noticed the princess in the soot-stained gown fleeing into the woods. They were all too busy fighting and dying. News traveled slowly to my remote corner of the world, but it traveled. I learned that my father had died in the Great Hall, falling to Caliph's blade. Lord Vorlog, I heard, had survived. He had bent the knee, along with the other surviving Draven lords, to the new Alpha King who now ruled a united kingdom from the rebuilt fortress at Dravenwood. Caliph Varro had won everything he had set out to win. I often wondered, in the lonely hours before sleep, if he ever thought of the price. This morning, the sea was calm, a sheet of hammered silver under a pale sun. I was on the narrow beach below my cottage, gathering mussels from the tide pools, when a new scent cut through the familiar brine. It was a smell that did not belong here. It was the scent of frostbitten pine and cold mountain stone. My heart didn't leap with fear. It gave a single, heavy, knowing thud against my ribs. My wolf, so often dormant, raised her head in my mind, not with a snarl, but with a deep, shuddering sigh of recognition. I did not turn. I continued to pry a stubborn mussel from a rock, my knuckles white with the effort. He stopped a dozen feet behind me. I could feel the weight of his presence, the sheer force of his alpha nature that made the very air seem to grow still. I waited for the command, the harsh demand, the declaration of ownership. I had spent a year preparing for this moment, steeling myself against it. But all that came was the quiet crunch of his boots on the shingle, and then silence. Finally, when the silence stretched so taut it felt it might snap, I stood up, turning to face him. The year had changed him too. He was still the formidable predator I remembered, but the conqueror's arrogance was gone from his eyes. He looked weary, haunted. There were new lines of strain around his mouth, and the silver in his eyes seemed less like shattered ice and more like cooling embers. He was not dressed for war or for court, but in simple, dark traveling clothes. He was alone. "Arinya," he said, and my name on his lips was not acclaim, but a breath of exhausted relief. "You found me," I stated, my voice even. I was proud of how steady it was. "I never stopped looking," he answered, his gaze sweeping over me, taking in the rough-spun clothes, the calloused hands, the stray bit of seaweed in my hair. He was seeing not the princess he had used, but the woman I had become. "This is a hard place to disappear." "That was the idea," I replied, my chin held high. "What do you want, Caliph? Have you come to finish the job? To drag your lost queen back to her cage?" A shadow of pain crossed his face. "I have not come to drag you anywhere. I have come to talk." I gave a short, bitter laugh. We had our talk, in a clearing full of swords and a castle full of lies. "I know," he said, his voice rough with an emotion I couldn't name. "Regret? I know what I did. I know how I used you, how I used the bond." He took a tentative step forward. "I won. I took your father's throne. I united the Pax. The war is over. And it is the most hollow victory of my life." I watched him, my expression unyielding, my heart encased in a careful wall of ice. "A kingdom without its queen is just a pile of stones," he continued, his gaze intense, pleading. "An alpha without his mate is incomplete. My own power feels frayed, unsettled. The land feels it. The people whisper that the union is a cursed one because the fated queen abandoned her king. The Draven lords serve me out of fear, not loyalty. The peace I forged is as fragile as sea ice in the spring. It will not hold, not without you." "So you need me," I said, the words sharp. "Not because I'm your mate, but because I'm a symbol, another tool to secure your power." "No," he said, and the word was raw, torn from him. "I need you because I was a fool." I saw the bond as a weapon, a key, a means to an end. I never stopped to see the woman it was tied to. I saw a princess to be claimed, not a partner to be won. I saw the daughter of my enemy, and I did not realize until you were gone, fleeing into the flames because of what I had done, that you were the other half of my own soul. He took another step, closing the distance between us until only a few feet of shell-strewn sand remained. The pull of the bond was a physical thing now, a warm tide pulling me toward him. My wolf whined softly in my mind, her anger finally melting away, leaving only a deep, aching need. "I am not asking you to be my queen," he said, his voice dropping to a low, earnest murmur. "I am asking you to be my partner. Help me heal this broken kingdom we have both inherited. not from a throne above them, but as one of them. Teach me how to rule with more than just a sword. Your father was bound by hate. I do not want to be. The bond chose us, Arinya. It chose us to end the silence, to end the war. I was too blind to see it, but I see it now. He stopped, his plea hanging in the salt-laced air between us. He did not touch me. He did not try to force the issue. He simply stood there, his soul stripped bare, leaving the choice entirely, finally, in my hands. I looked at my cottage on the cliff, at the quiet, lonely peace I had built for myself. I could say no, I could send him away and live out my days with the sea and the sky. I could remain safe. But I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that it would always feel incomplete. My voice was not meant for haggling over fish. It was meant to command, to counsel, to build. The blood of alphas ran in my veins, and it would not be content to simply survive. I had fled the fire to save myself from being his prize. But he was no longer offering me a gilded cage. He was offering me a broken world and asking for my help to fix it. He was offering me a choice. Slowly, I took a step toward him, and another. I stopped directly in front of him, so close I could feel the heat of his body, could see the storm of hope and fear in his silver eyes. There will be no Vero throne or Draven throne, I said, my voice quiet but firm as the cliffs behind me. There will be one council. Our children will not be told tales of your victory or my father's defeat. They will be told the story of how two warring bloodlines were united by a bond the moon herself decreed. A wave of profound relief washed over his features, so powerful it seemed to physically steady him. Yes, he breathed. Anything. It will be as you say. He raised his hand, just as he had in the misty clearing, his scarred fingers trembling slightly. This time I did not flinch. I watched as he gently, reverently brushed a stray strand of hair from my cheek. His touch was not fire and possession. It was warmth. It was homecoming. The bond between us sang, a clear, perfect note of rightness that resonated in every part of my being. Where the silence had once lived, a new world of possibility was taking root. It would not be easy. It would be a life forged in the ashes of the old one. A peace built with scarred hands and broken hearts. But it would be ours. He did not speak again. He simply held out his hand. An invitation, a promise. After a moment, I placed my hand in his. His fingers closed around mine, a perfect solid fit. The silence was over. Our story was just beginning.